Thank you for joining us today. I have a very eager group here. I started to help out with a Web 2.0 unit in Communications 20. And I think this is the third year that I've done so. And my goodness, the term Web 2.0 wasn't necessarily familiar with them, but they're basically Web 2.0ers. They do all kinds of neat stuff with it. And I told them that the best way to get started with this whole unit is talk to the Saskatchewan expert on this. And
where?
And I've also mentioned how your leadership in this area has really helped us out in Saskatchewan. Anytime I feel comfortable in my job, I go see a presentation from Mr. Sharesky, and I go home scratching my head and wondering how to change the way we do things in the Northeast School Division. So again, it's very exciting to have you here. And from a timeline perspective,
you want this now or later?
We'll do some dealings later on with online courses or something. How's that?
Okay.
But anyway, I'm not sure. We're not necessarily going to introduce everybody, but I'm not sure how you can see. You can see some of the students here. Some of them are smiling. Some of them are sleeping.
Wake up that kid in the back. He's sleeping.
No, that's Ms. McDonald, actually.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But anyway, you're free to go ahead and share some of your thoughts about Web 2.0, read, write, web, all that kind of related stuff. And I'm also going to be encouraging the students here to ask some questions if they come up with anything. So
hold it. I just have to respond to my daughter, I think, who's phoning me. Just hold on 1 second.
No problem.
Hello.
Well, I could try hooking these up again, but it just didn't seem to make a difference. So. Will it reach?
Sorry about that. We're back.
Okay.
So you want me to start, hey? Well, I guess this is a pretty big topic, I guess, And I think one of the things is to start with is to think about the way that you think about some of these technologies and the way that you use them, and but more importantly, thinking about how you will use them in the future. That's kind of the important part here, because I think one of the things that you have to kind of understand, that your teachers in the room probably do better than you, is sort of see the history of where this has come from to where this is going. And you know, when Mr. Swedzinski and your other teachers probably began using computers in the classrooms, it was a lot different than it is now. And partly because the technologies that we had available were really kind of one-way technologies. And what the internet has done in recent times, and I mean, it's largely because of the pipe, the ability to send information quickly and a lot of it back and forth, is it's enabled to connect more than just information, and now we're connecting to people. And so even this example of us having this conversation, you know, in this case, hundreds of kilometers away, and it wouldn't make a difference if I was in China or Australia or wherever. This technology is available for anyone who has that pipe. And so the change is that instead of living in a world where information was scarce, where the only place you could have the knowledge and understanding basically was in a library. That was it. That was where information was stored, is in that library, and your librarian kind of guarded that and protected that, and you knew that when you walked in there, if there wasn't information that you looked for, it basically didn't exist. Let's just play a little game. How many searches do you think were done on Google this month? Or in the month of April, whatever. Throw out a number.
4 million?
Not even close. 2.7 billion. 2.7 billion searches were done in Google last month. Here's my question to you. Before there was Google, who were people asking those questions to? Where were they going? And in most cases, they just weren't asked. People weren't asking those questions because they knew there's no way to know. How often are you now, you know, whether you're watching television or having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden a thought pops in your mind, oh, who is that? Or I need more information, and we quickly go and gather that information. I mean, that's just one example of how information is not scarce anymore. You can get it anywhere you want. You can get it with any device you have, almost anywhere. You don't have to be in a library. You don't have to be at home to get that information. That so dramatically changes the way we think about the world. But as I mentioned before, the real shift is a shift from just that information to a connection with people. And so, because information ultimately is fine and it's good and it's necessary, but really what and I saw that girl yawn, but that's probably just because it's after lunch and she probably had a cheeseburger and all that stuff, and so now she's just sort of getting settled. But see, before that I wouldn't have known that, right? If it was just voice, but now I can see you're yawning right up front there. Believe me, a lot of people yawn when they listen to me too, so don't feel bad. But really, the difference is now this is about social. How many of you have a Facebook account? Everybody's got a Facebook account. Well, what's Facebook about? It's about connecting with people. I mean, there's information there and there's learning there, but it's a social place. It's a place to hang out, and it's a place to be together in ways that you couldn't be together before. And it supplements and it complements the relationships that you have in face-to-face environments. And that whole blending of those kinds of worlds is really important. The challenge that you are going to have is not so much that, because that's good. You have that social part down. The challenge that you're going to have is connecting that to how to leverage social networks for things like learning, things like job advancement. How are you going to leverage it for that? And that's where the real trick comes in, because now you have the choice, right? You're now choosing to be connected to people that you know. People that are in your classroom, in your town, maybe people that you've met that have been part of a sports team or that you've met somewhere, and that's good. So, okay, I'll ask you another question. How many of you have friends on your social network that you've never met face to face? Couple people. Now, my question to you about that is that, and the other thing is we have to be really careful, I think, in the definition of friend. Facebook calls it a friend. Most of the times they're not really friends, they're just connections that we have. And so I think that part of that's really important to understand, how we define the word friend and so forth. But of those people that you've friended on Facebook that you've never met before, you know, the challenge that you have is, what's the value of having that connection? Is it just because they were a friend of a friend and they, you know, well, how that is, would you request a friendship and you said yeah, and that was it? Or are you actually able to, even though you've never met these people, is to develop some type of a relationship with them? In other words, maybe they live in a different city, and so if they live in Calgary and you're planning a trip to Calgary next weekend, that you could say to them and request, hey, we need to find a hotel. Do you know any good places for a hotel? Or do you know any good things to do when we're in Calgary? And those kinds of things. That's the kind of relationships that weren't even possible 5 years ago. That you could even consider asking a complete stranger in the sense that you've never met them, and yet feel like you have a relationship with them, that you can ask that kind of information and receive that. Now think that's a really simple example. But what I'm talking about is having connections with people who could perhaps get you a job, or help you with your work, or help you meet a mate. That's possible. I think 1 out of 8 people, I think 1 out of 8 people last year that were married met online. That's pretty surprising. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that some of you in that room will find your mate online. And while that may seem a little weird, and I think there's weird aspects about it, it's a reality, and it's not necessarily a negative or bad reality. We're just sort of understanding. But part of the reason why, if you said that to your parents, oh, I met this guy online, how many of your parents would be really excited about that and say, oh, awesome that you met somebody online and you're going to marry them? They'd freak right out, right? But part of it is living in a world where we begin to understand how that is actually possible and how that could actually work. And we're right at that stage right now where there's a group of people that kind of understand how that can work, and then there's a whole bunch of people, and for lack of a better word, I'll just say old people, like myself, but I don't know how else to say it, that have a hard time understanding that all this stuff is available online and all these connections are made online. And even you, the challenge, again, as I'm trying to state, the challenge that you have is to how do we use the ability that we have now to connect to people, to use that for really positive, life-changing kinds of experiences. And I personally can attest to how that's made a huge difference for me as a teacher. And I'll give you an example. I did a presentation at a conference about a month ago, and I called it the lazy, you yawned again, the lazy professors. And what I meant by being lazy was, in a sense, kind of what Mr. Swedzinski is doing right here, right now, right? He's asking somebody else to come in and share or instruct where he could be doing this himself, but he said, no, I'll ask somebody else to do it. I teach a course at the university as well as working in a K-12 school division similar to the way Mr. Swedzinski does. But in that course, I always have experts come in and talk about specific things because I know there's people that know way more than I do about certain things. But what I've been able to do is build myself a network of people that I can call upon and make stuff and do stuff for me and share with me that makes my job way easier. Because in the past, I would have to build and create all that stuff myself. Now, it's not, again, you've probably heard this before, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's becoming, that concept is becoming more and more important. So the challenge that I bring to you is to begin to think about your social networks and finding people, connecting to people who are going to be able to make your job better, make your life easier and more interesting and dynamic. Because especially living in small town Saskatchewan, we're pretty narrow in the fact that we have, you've gone to group, and most of you probably, how many people would you say are in that room right now that you have gone to school with since kindergarten? About. Just throw out a couple numbers, just I'm curious.
4 out of 9.
Yeah, so that's a pretty high percentage of you have been together your whole lives, and again, I'm not discounting that as being a good thing. But it can potentially be a very limiting thing, that these are the people the only people that I've gone to school with and learned from. Well, I think we're moving into a world where if you're in a school and you start kindergarten are we in Tisdale right now, Thad?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're in Tisdale, Saskatchewan, and you're a kindergarten student, starting out and you look around and there's 12 kids in your classroom, why in the world would we want to limit our learning to only learning with those 12 people? When potentially we could learn with anybody who's interested in anything we are. So if you have a passion for hockey, or if you have a passion for horses, or if you like building robots, I don't care what you're interested in. There are ways and people out there who have exactly the same interest as you are, and you can connect to them and have really powerful, meaningful learning relationships with them and social relationship with them that you couldn't possibly have before. I think that our kids that are now starting school will have to have that potential. And you're you're at that stage where you're kind of in the middle ground where you use these tools, but I dare say that a lot of you haven't thought about using them in those kinds of ways because you're just connected with each other. So that's my challenge, is to think about how to take these technologies and move it. So I don't know if that's exactly what you wanted me to talk about, or if you have any questions or want to just have I've got a few minutes here if we want to have a little discussion. I'm game, but that's kind of my opening argument.
Excellent. I'll just ask if there's any questions. Not yet. I might have just a few more specific questions for you, Mr. Sharesky. For instance, we talked a little bit about Twitter yesterday, and I just remember being at the IT Summit, and it was David Warlick, I believe, who was posed a question from the audience, and he threw it up on Twitter, and within 5 minutes he had a whole pile of answers relating to it. So just how Twitter can be used, for teachers and for students potentially. Of course, Twitter's blocked, but we're going to unblock it for a couple of classes here just so we can experiment with it. But anyway, that would be my question about Twitter.
Yeah, and Twitter's a really good example, I guess, of it's a microcosm, I guess, of a lot of these shifts. So Twitter, in a sense, is exactly like your Facebook updates, except that's all it is. There's not the other stuff. So it's sort of a stripped-down version, in a sense, of Facebook, where all you do is say what you're doing right now, which, when you tell people that the first time, that has got to be the dumbest thing in the world. Why in the world would anybody care that I ate a cheese sandwich for lunch today? How in the world would that be meaningful? But that's really where the social part of it comes in, because in order for me to build a relationship with people, it's the same thing as if you did go to a place, let's say you're out on the playground and there was a new kid there. You don't go up to the new kid and say, hey, can you help me out with my homework or whatever? I mean, you have to build a relationship. So part of it is a space where you kind of ease in and you get to know people, and you use things that are trivial, or in some ways, kind of that personal stuff that we use to get to know each other. But once you do, you build up, and again, here's where these definitions have to be really rethought. You get followers. Now that sounds almost cultish, right? I mean, I have 3,000 followers on Twitter, which means that every time I post something, whether it's to my, and you know, the beautiful part about Twitter, of course, that you can post it from your phone, from your computer, whatever, then they see what I'm talking about. And so it ranges from those kinds of really goofy, inconsequential things to those kinds of questions that I would pose. For example, I am looking for resources for something. I would say, does anybody have a good source for this? Does anybody have an idea how to do that? And by building up a community and having 3,000 people, I get those results back. So I will get 30 or 40 people responding saying, here's something I found. And even out of that 30 or 40, there might be, even if there's 5 really good ideas, that saved me the work, and there's another girl yawning, that saved me the work of having to boy, you got your work cut out for me when I'm done. Well, maybe it'll be easier, I don't know. That saved me the work of having to find all this stuff, because I've got people working for me. And I liken it to actually having my own personal research team, so that I got people working around the clock for me all the time. Anytime I've got something, I got people working on it. They're not getting paid. They don't even know they're part of my research team. But you build up that network of people in order to help you do the things you need to do. And so, again, at your age, some of those concepts might seem a little, well, I don't really have those kinds of issues. But I mean, I'll give you a kind of a bad example, but a good one. There was a kid who had an essay due. Probably, what do we talk about? 10th, 11th graders here?
11 and 12.
Okay. Yeah, I think he was a 12th grade student. Had an essay due on some weird topic that he didn't know much about. Searched the internet, and there was some stuff on there, but couldn't really find a nice, succinct article on it. So he went to Wikipedia, and he started an article. Just put the title of the article on there, about a month before the paper was due. And then a month later, the article was already done by everybody else but him. He just copied that one and handed it in. Now, you can say that that's cheating, which it was, but at the same time, highly, highly innovative around the idea of letting community support and do his work. Again, it's kind of a bizarre example, and you can see where it's not maybe the best one, but I hope you do see in that example of how he was smart enough to use a community of people to help him do what he needed to do. So I'm not suggesting you go out and try that in a perhaps an unethical way, but I do hope you understand how to use that one. So Twitter is very much like that. It's just sort of this real condensed way of building up people. And so there's people if you're interested in music. And then of course you have the celebrities. Ashton Kutcher was one, and Oprah have been recently sort of gained fame around it. Ashton Kutcher has 1 million followers, and from his perspective, here's how he views that. If he doesn't go on there, he leaves it up to the whims of tabloids and paparazzis and all kinds of other media sources to tell his story. Instead, he can just very directly speak to his fans, people that like Ashton Kutcher. By the way, I don't follow Ashton Kutcher. I could care less about what Ashton Kutcher does, but some people do. Over a million people do. They can follow him and find out. So if you're interested in music and you like John Mayer, he's there. And so you have this connection with people. The only sort of pseudo, he's not even, well, I guess he would be a pseudo celebrity to me, not you. But there's a couple of professional golfers that have Twitter accounts. And so I follow them. And there was a pretty important golf tournament last weekend in Florida. And he actually, in between his rounds, would send out little tweets about that. And I actually, a couple times, have asked him questions about different things, and he's responded to me directly. Now, you know, that's kind of interesting to me, that now I can speak directly to somebody that I'm interested in and get a response back. So I'm not suggesting that if you asked Ashton Kutcher a question on Twitter that he would respond to you, but the potential is there. That potential, again, never really existed before the advent of what we call Web 2.0. So that's a little bit about how Twitter works for me.
Mr. Shareski, you have a question? I'll just try to pass the mic over here.
Could someone just easily make up that they're a celebrity just to, like, say, so you'd think you'd be talking to them, but it's just someone making it up?
Absolutely. In fact, Twitter tries, as best they can, that's a great question, tries to monitor that, but it does happen so often that it kind of goes through. What a lot of people have done is they've actually called themselves, and you might, I don't know if there exists, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's somebody that's calls themselves fake Ashton Kutcher. And so you know that they're fake and they're just sort of almost in a parody way pretending to be somebody, but they're not doing it secretly. But you're right, that does happen. But what eventually happens after a while is that with so many people involved in something like Twitter, and the same thing happens with Wikipedia too. You know, people will say, well, information on Wikipedia could be false. Absolutely, but what happens over time, and this is proven to be true, that people that actually care about an article or care about a person they think they're following will call them out and say, hey, this isn't right. So on the Wikipedia example, if somebody's writing, if you started a topic on bullfighting, and you made up a bunch of stuff, you just put anything on there on bullfighting, people who actually care about bullfighting and are knowledgeable about it say, hey, this isn't right, and they tend to fix it up. And on Twitter, the same thing would happen, is that after a while, people do get called out and say, hey, you're not who you think you are, and then actually the founders of Twitter will remove that account. So, but the potential does exist, and I think that's a really important thing to note about any information that you get on the internet, is that you do have to have that critical eye. And again, the difference is when I went to school, I let my librarian be that critical eye for me, because I assumed that when I went in the library and grabbed the book that it was authentic and real and true. For the most part it was, but it wasn't necessarily. I should have had that critical eye, you know, 30 years ago when I was in high school. So it's just more important to have it now.
Other questions? Looks like they're fully satisfied with what they've heard, because there's no questions happening here.
They're just tired.
I'm very happy that you took the approach and personalized it for them. They're going to be looking at a variety of aspects. We're going to be looking at social bookmarking, blogs, wikis. Their ultimate product is building a page probably in Synthesite, and also, of course, podcasting and those types of things. But I think this has been really helpful in any time we're looking at these products and examining them, and they can look at it from their perspective and how it can help them now as students, and how it'll be able to help them in the next few years when they graduate. So this has been excellent.
I guess I would just, I think that's a wonderful approach that they're taking. I guess I'd really challenge them to think about building a personal learning network. So even if along this journey you can connect with 1, 2, 3 people who you really find a connection with on a variety of levels, whether it's a personal interest you have, whether it's around your school or whatever. I think that would be a really, I would be really curious to hear how that went with them, because quite frankly, I'm doing a very similar thing right now with teaching pre-service teachers at the University of Regina. It's a summer or a spring session, so we started last week, and we'll be done June 18th. And there's a whole pile of similarities to what you've just described and to what they're going to go through. And my goal for them, one of my goals for them, is to be able to see the value and to begin to build a personal learning network, connecting with people. So really think about these things beyond the tools and beyond what they do, and thinking about connecting to people, because to me that's the real interesting and fun part. And I gave a talk last week to a group of grade 9s about digital safety and so forth, and I don't, as you can probably tell, I don't give people the gloom and doom story about, oh, never put a picture on the internet or never do any of that stuff, because quite frankly the research doesn't point that out as to be necessarily a dangerous activity. I mean, dangerous activities are pretty similar to dangerous activities that you do offline, and that's kind of hanging around with the wrong people and saying the wrong things and doing the wrong things. But just actually putting a picture up of yourself isn't going to give you a problem. But we talked about strangers, and there's this typical, there's this notion that we think we'll never talk to strangers. Well, I don't believe that's. I think that's a lousy way to go. Never talk to strangers. I think we talk to strangers, but we talk to them in a safe and controlled environment. I want my own kids. I've got kids that are of ages 20, 22 to 10. Well, we just went on a trip to Europe over Easter time, and my 10-year-old had some wonderful conversations with strangers. I was there watching that, but she got to meet a whole pile of people. And if I said to her, and if you took the stance, we'll never talk to somebody that you don't know, how in the world are you going to meet anybody? So this is about finding safe environments where you can talk to strangers. And there are ways to do that online, so I hope that as you're exploring these kinds of tools, you find those ways that are safe to get to know people. And you might get to know people and find out they're creeps, or they're just not that interesting. That's life. But at the same time, I don't want people to miss out on the opportunity, as I said, to connect with people where geography doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if somebody lives in Los Angeles or Australia or Guatemala or wherever. We should be able to connect with people wherever and in all kinds of ways, just as we're doing right now. So that would be kind of my encouragement to you as you go through. But anyways, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for taking your time, Mr. Sharesky. I guess my last question to you is, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when. We'd like to contact you again with some additional questions. What would be the best way to go about doing that?
Oh, the same way you did here. Just ping me on Skype and find out. And sometimes you can just do it off the cuff, and if I'm around, I certainly don't mind taking a few minutes. And if you want a little bit more pre-planning, then just ping me and let me know.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dean.
Okay. Get some rest, you guys. See ya.